Hello everybody, and you're all very welcome to Gaining Ground Reflections at the beautiful venue of Glór in Ennis. I'm embarrassed to admit I have never been here before, and it's a really lovely building. Somebody apologised, I think it was Siobhan, said that there's works underway, but even with the builders in, it looks good. One can only imagine how nice it'll be by the time that it's a library, I think, it's been added, is it, to the back of the building. So this is probably a first for everybody in the room. So I think we'll work as best we can. Everybody here has made a huge effort to be here, and I suppose everybody here, you could say it's an exclusive gathering of people. I suppose we could make a virtue of it. It's a day-long event, as you're all aware, and it's a reflection on a major public arts programme. This event was due to take place in March. We're finally here, and we're finally getting together for it. Basically, it was a unique programme organised by Clare County Council Arts Office, looking at public art in a rural context. Clare County Council Arts Office asked a group of artists working in different media to come together and work with communities. And it was really all about, from what I can make of it, to give people a voice through art. And in looking at some of the films that were made by the projects, boy, did they find their voice. Some really fantastic, really unusual, and some very uplifting projects were commissioned as a result of this programme. Before we get going, I'm just going to give a few thank yous to the people behind the day and behind the projects. From Clare Arts Office, Siobhan Mulcahy and Sandra Stackpool. From Glór, Orla Flanagan, Nick Broomfield and Ella on sound, who are the tech wizards, and they'll keep things running smoothly, and I hope I haven't jinxed it by saying that. We can also blame me when things fall apart. Ellen and Nick. Front of house team, Sharon and Maeve and Alan on catering, all of the speakers, and then of course Vincent O'Shea, who's putting manners on us all for the day. So we'll thank everybody in advance, because a lot of work really did go through, an awful lot of extra tasks in hand. A lot of work went into today's event. If you have your phones, we can ask you to keep your phones on silent, but there is a hashtag for today's event, and the hashtag is Gaining Ground. So feel free to tweet away about how wonderful today's event is, and the Twitter handle is CCC Public Art, Clare County Council Public Art. And without further ado, I'm going to ask the Mayor of Clare, Councillor Mary Howard, to formally open events, and then we'll get things going. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. As a very proud Clare woman, I'm delighted to welcome you all here to my town. I'm so delighted that you're here, and I want you to come back on staycations. Notice I said plural, not just one. There's lots to see and do here in County Clare. So you're all very welcome here today. So as Mayor of Clare, I'm delighted to welcome you all to Glór this morning for what promises to be a very stimulating day for you all. Glór has just reopened this week, and it's the first daytime event taking place, so you certainly are the chosen few, as Helen was referencing there, which she was speaking earlier. On behalf of the Council, I would like to thank Orla and her team for all the work that they have put in today, including Nick here, who he sometimes needs roller skates. We have our Council meeting in here, and Nick runs around with the microphone when the councillors, when the 28 councillors want to speak, so he's getting to know us all. So like all of society, Glór and the arts face many, many challenges in this, what we're calling the new normal. Whilst today we look at some of the projects that have taken place in Clare in recent times, it offers us an opportunity to look forward and to consider how the arts can serve society and how communities can influence and shape the arts. At the heart of the arts is the artist, and today's event shares work, ideas and experiences of some of the best artists in Ireland. We're delighted that you've come to join us today, and I would like to thank Vincent O'Shea for curating today's event. And he's extremely well organised. It was the best organised photographic session I've been at. So well done. I think I'll be looking for you for other jobs in the future. And arts policy is ever changing. Conversations and discussions at national level need to be informed by what is happening at local level. So we're delighted to welcome a representative from the Arts Council here with us today. And I want to reiterate the Clare County Council's commitment to the arts, and the projects displayed here today show how dynamic and provocative we have been, and we look forward to realising new ambitions in the months and the years ahead. So stay safe, everybody. Take care, and God bless.
Thank you very much, Mary. Today there'll be a series of presentations. We'll be showing films of some of the projects that were undertaken as part of Gaining Ground, and also there'll be an opportunity for some Q&As. So I'll introduce you to the first of today's speakers, Arts Officer with Clare County Council for over 20 years, and the woman who instigated and designed the commissioning programme for Gaining Ground.
Thanks very much, Helen, and thanks to the Mayor for her lovely words as well. And thanks to you, the audience. It's a bit strange being here looking out at such a dispersed gathering, but I'm very conscious that it's a distinguished gathering as well, and we're delighted, obviously, to welcome you here. Obviously, we're limited to numbers. It was our intention to have this day back in March, but the gods worked against us, shall we say. But we were anxious to go ahead in some way, because for us and for the amount of work that has gone into the programme over the last, I suppose, year in particular, but actually it's going back over 4 years now, as you'll get a sense of that, and throughout the day. It's important to celebrate it. It's important to mark it, and I think it's really important to put it up there in terms of what's happening nationally in public art, and particularly in public art in rural areas. We're very conscious that there is a lot of discussion around policy, around programming, around what to do, around what not to do, and we're hoping that today's event will be I suppose part of that conversation, or that it may in some ways influence that conversation at local and national level. And that was the reason we decided to go ahead with today. It's a shame there's not more here, but we're looking to record today's events, to edit it down, and to share those on our various platforms, in the hope that the discussion would reach a broader audience as well, and that other people through social media or other ways may be able to take part as well. So I think it's just really important to say that your contribution today is really, really valued. And it's not so much about what I or Clare County Council has to say from the stage as such. It is very much the voice of the artist and the voice of the audience here today, in terms of questions that are posed, in terms of discussions that might happen. That's central to what happens. Sally O'Leary was originally on board to curate the programme, and she'll talk about that in a little while. And we've been very lucky to work with excellent people in Sally and Vincent, who came on afterwards, Sheila Quinn, who worked as a coordinator, and obviously the artists and the communities as well, who are central to the whole public art programme. We always see public art commissioning as a three-way process. There is the local authority, who is there central as the commissioners. There are the artists that we commission to do the work, and then there is the public, and it's the public in the public art that often a lot of the discussion comes around. It has developed over the years. We would have had initially a very traditional approach to commissioning, but Gaining Ground was the first time that we actually pooled our public art monies together to look at how we could encourage more ambitious, more long-term, and possibly more strategic projects in rural areas in County Clare. And I'm hoping that you will agree with us that we think it was a worthwhile way of progressing as such. It hasn't been without its difficulties. And I think that's really important to stress as well. I'm just conscious that some people can't be here today. You know, there have been criticisms of how things have happened or how things have not happened maybe as well. And that's all learning, and that's all really important, I think, in terms of those discussions. We would have had the way that we worked it was by pooling the money. We divided it up into 5 or 6 different commissions in various areas of the county, sort of north, south, east, west. working along the local authority municipal district areas. That was the first time that had happened. So traditionally, if public art monies were allocated to a certain town or village, the public art project happened in that town or village. So that move away was quite difficult for the council to undertake in terms of local representation and local communities looking for the art project to go back into that specific village or that specific town. But I suppose we had adopted the approach that we were looking at the public and we were looking at communities in terms of communities of interest, rather than the traditional geographical communities. I'm not saying it's the correct approach. I'm not saying it's a better approach, but it was the approach that we took at the time. So it'll be interesting to see how that, works its way out in terms of what emerged from pooling monies to create more what we would have termed ambitious projects. So that's just to give a little bit of context as to where we're coming. Your views, your comments are really important here today. We're delighted to be able to showcase and to say how proud we are of the projects that we did commission, and you'll get a sense of them as we go throughout the day. I'm particularly conscious that Sean Lynch is here with us, and Sean's project was the one that perhaps suffer the most with the current situation that we're in that we were due to have launch in March in Ennistimon, and literally the day before we had to pull it. So I'm delighted that Sean is here today. I'm delighted you get a chance to see some of the work that he has done as well, and the publication that he has produced will be available for sale outside as well if anybody is interested. So most of the others, in some shape or form, we were able to realise the public event of them, and as I say, I hope that you will enjoy what we have commissioned. Certainly for us it has been wonderful to work with the calibre of artists that came through our commissioning process. It has been wonderful to work with communities that they have engaged throughout the commissioning process, and we would hope that we would be able to continue to do so in the future. So thank you all very, very much.
Great, thank you very much, Siobhan. Next up, I'll ask Sally O'Leary to come up, please. Sally is Arts Officer in County Offaly and the Curator of the Gaining Ground programme. Thanks,
Sally. Thank you very much. And first of all, just to say I'm absolutely delighted to be here, and particularly, on today when we're sort of celebrating the whole programme. For me, in particular, what's great about this was, I was involved from about 2016, so it's a long time, it's a long programme, and so it's going to be a fantastic opportunity today to talk about, how it developed and to hear some of the stories and see some of the examples of artists' work, to talk and to value about the impact that it had over a long period of time. I was asked by Vincent and Siobhan to talk a little bit about the initiation of the Gaining Ground programme and how the idea of the programme came about. So just to reiterate really what Siobhan was saying, is that I was only part of this programme. I started at the beginning, and so I'm only part of the journey, I suppose. I was involved in the development of the programme itself and the initiation of the commissioning process. And I moved on from after that point, but what was delightful for me, I suppose, at that time was the range and the quality of the artistic endeavour which had come through that commissioning process. So as I say, I'm really looking forward to hearing more about how that developed through this process today. So I was engaged by Clerk Arts Office to develop the public art programme from their Present for Art budget. And as again Siobhan has mentioned, they had pooled their fundings from their Percent for Art and from their OPW schemes, and they were looking to develop a commissioning process that would be a programme rather than standalone commissions. And of course, the benefit of this approach is that you are able to have a more ambitious programme in what you're trying to achieve, sometimes as a larger project. So when I came on board, there were some parameters in place. The budgets obviously were set, the locations within regions were set, and the objectives of the Arts Office and what they were trying to achieve from the project. So I suppose the objective of the programme overall was founded on the principle of enabling high quality arts commissioning within a rural context and with rural communities. And we wanted that to be both of benefit to the artists but also to the communities themselves, and that it would have potential to have a lasting legacy from the encounters of both groups. Because it was a large-scale programme, the development of it took place and was planned to take over a number of years, and that was primarily because of the logistics of it and in managing the programme. So we split it into 4 sections, and we had Legacy, which was for North Clare, we had Reimagining the Rural for West Clare, Dancing Together in Shannon, and Reflections, which was to take place here today. So both Legacy and Reimagining the Rural, they had a very extensive area from which artists could propose to work with. And there was an overriding ethos that spanned the whole programme, but each of the elements were designed specifically for the area in mind. So for example, with Legacy, the Arts Office were very keen to recognise and to acknowledge the rural arts programme that had been developing in North Clare since 2006, and there'd been a lot of work and a lot of artists working in the area, and programmes such as Shifting Ground and Ground Up, and there was the continuing legacy of the Ground Up collective, artist collective. So that was very much taken on board. So while the commissioning of those programmes was slightly different from Gaining Ground, the legacy of it was important to the Arts Office because they wanted to make sure that this programme was built upon the quality of previous commissionings. But it was made clear at the time that it was a different programme, it wasn't a continuation. So we were looking at inviting artists to look at new ideas, new methodologies to bring the rural arts discourse into the fore, and to be talking possibly about adding conversations that were already taking place. In West Clare, again, the Reimagining the Rural was focused on the place and the specific location. We were looking at the idea of dispersed populations, looking at possibly coastal areas that had specific susceptibility to seasonality, for example, so from nature, from the idea of movement of populations, and seasonality around things like the trade and tourism. And Dancing Together, again, was a slightly different focus. We wanted to keep the ethos of the programme, which was in terms of engagement with the community, or that of making it new communities, but we were specifically commissioning a dance piece for Shannon Town. But the idea was to keep the brief open, as we had with the others, within the context of what could be proposed by a dance artist or a dance company. And the final element of the programme was called Reflections. And when I say final element, in fact, it was, of course, meant to be instrumental and embedded within the whole programme. So the selected commissions and the commissioning process was subject to reflection. And of course, today's event is very much part and parcel of this process. So in terms of the idea of how the ideas came around to develop this particular type of commissioning process, I suppose I was always of the opinion that if you're commissioning art, any artwork, that as a commissioner you're an enabler, and you're enabling an environment to be created from which a variety of potentials can take place. And so more simply, that allows for an open-ended organic process or approach. So fundamentally, the programme was to have a strong community ethos. And that was based upon, the development of the programme. And at the time, I was struck by a quote by the artist and musician Brian Eno, who said, "Sometimes the strongest importance of a work of art is the celebration of some kind of temporary community." So this, of course, is quite a significant statement, not only in the implication it has for the meaning of a work of art, and that is the meaning that an artist intends for a work of art, but also the meaning that the person engaged with that work places upon that work of art. But it also has significance on the idea around the making of some form of temporary community, in whatever form that takes. And this, of course, raises the question, what do we mean by community? And of course, that's something that you can talk about at length. So I suppose today, what I'm looking forward to is, through all the talks and the presentations, is to see how it has been interpreted and whether this became a reality made possible by that relationship between commissioned artists and community. And as with any programme of this complexity and duration, there are, of course, many issues that arise. But on a personal level, I just want to congratulate Clare County Council, Siobhan, the Arts Office, and everybody involved for enabling the opportunity, taking the risk, and where necessary, being flexible enough to develop and sustain the integrity of the programme. And I think what might come from this discussion, and with others, is that commitment is essential to ensure the level of quality and innovation required to explore and experiment within the field of oral arts practice. So I'm looking forward to hearing and taking part of today's conversation. Thank you very much.
Now I'm going to ask Sinead O'Reilly to come up and make a presentation, please. Sinead is head of local arts with the Arts Council of Ireland, and you're going to give a talk on the short history of public art in Ireland. Yeah, very short. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you all very much, and thank you for the invitation to be here today. The last time I was in Glore, last October, this auditorium was packed, this stage was packed, and we're longing for those days to come back so we can really enjoy those in-person experiences of the arts. We will get there, and I suppose just to assure you in terms of the Arts Council, we are doing everything we can in terms of putting a shoulder to the wheel to make sure we can be back to brilliant experiences like that, and that artists can get back to work and we can continue to engage with brilliant things that are happening around the country. My role in the Arts Council is head of local place and I even trip over my own title, head of local place and public art, and that covers a multitude of things, but mainly my work is to connect in with local authorities, and public art, as you know, is a large feature of work of local authorities. I've had our role also in the Arts Council is not a direct role in relation to the Percent for Art scheme or public art, but a role is around advocacy and best practice. So that's the kind of position we take in that sense. I've had a long interest in public art, thinking back to my own undergrad thesis in 1993, 27 years ago, which is mad to think, which was around public art, and I've kept, I suppose, my interest level in that in terms of commissioning and now in the Arts Council as well. So what I'm going to do is give you a very short history on public art and the history of public art. Now, see, there's multitudes of potential documentaries on any of the topics I'm going to cover here, but so I'm going to, like a skimming stone, skip through nearly 200 years of public art in Ireland and to see how far we have got. So how are we going to do this thing? I tell you? Okay, great, okay. I don't have a click, so you're my click. I'll do that. Okay. Brilliant. Okay. So we can do a little click. Oh, okay. A click too far. Yeah. Okay. So public art involves, as we've heard earlier, an artist or artists creating artworks in response to a people, a place, and a time. It refers to artwork in any media and for and cited temporarily or permanently in public places. Today this is predominantly through the Percent for Art scheme, but not exclusively, and can be widely received, they can be hugely controversial, they can be liked or disliked, and they can become culturally visible signatures of a place no matter what the medium is. Public understanding of public art is largely shaped by monuments, by memorials and by statues that still exist around the country and are part of our cultural history. And these are usually figurative, they're celebrating or commemorating key historical, military or cultural figures or events, and many of these works still exist in their original sites, contributing to that assumption that public art should be figurative, decorative, celebratory or commemorative. So this very short history is kind of about it's a better understanding how far we've come, and with the risk of sounding like a meme, often when we doubt how far we can go, we need to understand how far we have come. So, the story of Nelson's Pillar is nearly a story of public art in Ireland all by itself, in terms of its erection in 1809, its bombing in 1966 on the 50th anniversary of the 1916 Rising, and its redevelopment in 2003. So it's the story of public art in Ireland is as wrapped up in our social, our cultural, our political and economic history as it is in our cultural and artistic journey. And in this case, as controversial as they come. Sculpture in Ireland 200 years ago was largely memorial, commemorative and monumental. 8 years after Nelson's Pillar, another monumental structure appeared in the form of the Wellington Testimonial, or more commonly known as the Wellington Monument, originally intended for St. Stephen's Green, which they put controversially at 62 metres high, they thought it to be out of scale. And the site has moved to Phoenix Park. The monument is its obelisk shape. Many monuments around the early 1800s, or 1800s in particular, take that form, that Egyptian pillar form. The O'Connell Monument was commissioned in 1864. The sculptor was John Henry Foley. The piece was installed after Foley's death in 1882, taking 18 years to complete. It has 4 winged female figures representing patriotism, eloquence, fidelity and courage. John Henry Foley, who was prolific in his work at this time, has monuments to his name across Dublin, around the country, in London, in India and in the States, some of which are now destroyed. One in particular, which I'm going to come back to later, was a statue of Lord Admiral Gough, who was from Limerick. He was sitting upon a horse in Phoenix Park and it was destroyed. I'll remind me to come back to that. The political and social environment is really important to look at if you start moving into the 1900s. To reference, and these large-scale monuments that we saw were predominantly done before the Irish Revival period, and the early 1900s brought much revolution around the world, advances in science and in the humanities, the dawn of film, and in Ireland, culturally, we were very focused on literature, on poetry, on theatre, and on painting. And as a result of political and social unrest, there are actually very few monuments erected in the first quarter of the 20th century in Ireland. There are some, not none, but one notable exception, thanks Nick, is in 1909, and we're in the build-up to the Irish Rebellion, and 8 years after her death, Queen Victoria was installed in front of Leinster House. There were intentions and attempts to remove Queen Victoria, but it took until 1948 to take her down from Leinster House. And the bronze element of the monument, the Queen herself, was sent into storage in the Royal Hospital, Kilmainham. And apparently then, Sally, you might know this or not know this, lay in field in Dangan in Offaly for over 20 years, apparently on her back. But she now resides in Sydney, Australia, so she was moved to Sydney in the 1980s. And there's been really interesting discussions recently on cancel culture, particularly in the Black Lives Matter campaign, and the removal of statues that commemorated those who were connected to slave trades. But over 100 years ago, we were busy cancelling culture too, anything in relation to the British Empire and any relation to culture. Sculptures were being taken down. William of Orange's College Green was destroyed in 1929. Charles I was destroyed, and numerous stately buildings, and of course, our National Archives. Irish artists during the Irish Revival absorbed the ethos of New Irish Art movement, also through the wider mood of nationalism that was then prevalent. And following the 1922 treaty, Irish sculptors were in immediate demand for commissions for bronze busts of leaders of the New Ireland. Ecclesiastical commissions became more common during this period for artists, and one of the most prolific creators of work during this time was Harry Clarke. And this is one of 12 pieces he did in Dingle, commissioned by a nun's order, and he was paid reportedly £1,000 for 12 windows, and thought to be some of his best work. While contemporary culture internationally was shifting to postmodernism and into contemporary art in the public realm in Ireland was still largely commemorative and realistic. Irish artist Jerome O'Connor from Anniscone and Kerry worked mainly in Catholic commissions in America, but has many works around Ireland. And the Lusitania Memorial was his last work, completed posthumously in 1943. In Limerick, on the 25th anniversary of the 1916 Rising, a commemorative committee there fundraised to build a memorial to 1916, but they ran out of money and wasn't completed until 1956, 14 years later. And that cost £5,000 to make. If you look at public art budgets now, and then obviously values are different, but that piece in Limerick is still proudly stands on the bridge there. Artists like Jerome and Albert, alongside many others, were commemorating many new Irish ideologies as well, and this one in Galway, also by Albert Power, is Pádraig O'Connor, the great Gaelic writer, immortalised in 1935 by Albert Power, and this work is at ground level, so we're now seeing a shift from figures on monuments and on pedestals down to ground level. Unfortunately, he was decapitated in 1999, and a replica was made in 2017. So the original is not there anymore. I think it's in the museum in Galway. Albert Power was also responsible for many other sculptures around the country at the time, notably the Pikeman Memorial in Tralee, which was unveiled by Maud Gonne. And you'll have noticed many that I've shown you so far, men on pillars up to this point, and winged female effigies were common. And this is the first Irish woman to be commemorated in public art. Unfortunately, she wasn't afforded a full body, and this is not the original either, as it was badly vandalised in 1945 and replaced in 1954 by artist Seamus Murphy. It's in Stephen's Green, unveiled by Emma de Valera in 1932, and a second bust of the Countess also exists in Leinster House. It wasn't until 1988, 56 years later, that in Dublin other female forms appeared in sculpture. So I'm skipping forward now to 1988. Both these sculptures were commissioned in 1988. Neither them through the Percent for Art scheme. It wasn't in place at that point. And Olivia by Eamon Doherty was funded by Smurfits as a gift to the city. And as was Molly Malone, it was a private commission as well. Both sculptures have since moved locations. I think maybe to make room for Lewis lines, but they still exist. And it wasn't until 1998, 10 years after these, that Countess Markovich actually got a whole body sculpture in Tara Street. And there's also a monument to her in Lochgill and Sligo as well. Thank you. So to jump back from that tangent of representation of women in public art, which is a fascinating subject in itself, the 1960s and 70s saw public artworks that were much more expressive and minimalist, and both of these pieces were installed in 1967 in St Stephen's Green. The Henry Moore sculpture celebrates W.B. Yeats, and the Wolf Tone was created by Edward Delaney. In the 1970s, we saw again, more advancement in kind of contemporary art, and Reflections by Michael Bulfin was commissioned by Scott Talon Walker for the Bank of Ireland headquarters in Baggot Street in 1975, and Mariner by John Behan is in the Docklands, also in 1975. And up to this point, you'll see the works that you've seen and I've shown you have been financed by memorial committees, by universities, and universities have been fantastic in commissioning contemporary Irish work, contemporary work, not just Irish but international as well. They've been corporately funded or by religious organisations. But in 1978, the OPW issued a letter to the Department of Finance requesting permission to set aside 1%, or £6,000 at the time, for the provision of works of art of various kinds, and sanction was given, and hence the birth of the Percent for Art scheme. It took time for it to develop, but that was the start in 1978. And the OPW mainly used the fund to purchase and commission artworks for interiors of buildings and government buildings, embassies, and often worked with the Arts Council at the time on the joint commissioning scheme so they could put in contemporary works into contemporary buildings. In the 1980s, this is a piece that was very controversial at the time, and at the time the Arts Council had a role in public art. And this piece was the The Great Wall of Kinsale by Eilish O'Connell. It was installed in Kinsale in 1988, and at the time it was a prize for Kinsale winning the Tidy Towns of that year. And the programme at the time meant that was part of their winnings, the Kinsale's winnings of the Tidy Town, and the Arts Council ran the competition for public artwork for the town. And perhaps public consultation processes were not as advanced as they are now, but this was not received well, and it was hugely controversial at the time. When Eilish O'Connell described her piece before it was installed to local people and committees, they, it reported that they were said, "We don't want it. We want a fisherman," and that she knew there was a battle on her hands for this piece to go in. It went in. Interesting, if you look back at RT News Archive, you can see a news item on that piece from 1988. It's really fascinating because the then chair of the Arts Council was at the launch, and he was encouraging people to stick with it. But it was very controversial. Back into Dublin in the 1980s, in 1986, the Department of Environment established a similar scheme to that of the OPW, and they titled it the Artistic Embellishment Scheme. A decision later on in the 90s was to review both schemes, and that led to what's called the Public Art Research Report, or the PART report, which went to government. At that point, the scheme expanded much more. But even though the Percent for Art scheme came into place with the Department of Environment in the 80s, the country was really in the midst of a huge recession. There wasn't, the spending on public finances wasn't there. There was mass unemployment, there was mass immigration, and the funding wasn't there for capital works. So it took time for the Percent for Art scheme to kind of get going. This Dublin Millennium Sculpture Symposium was there for the Millennium Year, and these 10 works are funded around the city by AIB and organised by the Sculpture Society of Ireland. And for the first time, Irish artists could respond to creating site-specific artworks around the city. With all they had was the sites, they could respond to those places. So you see some really interesting works there by Rachel Joint and Betty Newman-Maguire, and there are 2 of 10 pieces. They don't all exist anymore, some of them are gone or have been moved around the city. Back into the 1990s, and in 1997, on the basis of the recommendation of the PART report, the government approved the revision and the extension of the existing Percent for Art scheme to all government departments, and with construction budgets. So as we now approach a new century in Ireland, public art now begins to spread its wings and become more adventurous. And roadside art began to appear as we entered into the Celtic Tiger period and a booming economy. Local authorities at this point, many with newly or recently established arts offices, began to commission artworks and even work towards commissioning programmes like we're talking about today with Gaining Ground. So into the 2000s, one of the first commissioning programmes in the country was Breaking Ground in Ballymun, as the whole redevelopment of Ballymun was happening, and Breaking Ground they did do at the time. Really worth looking a deeper look at that programme as well. Do you remember earlier I mentioned Lord Admiral Gough was taken down in Phoenix Park because his sculpture was destroyed, and that sculpture by John Henry Foley. Well, John Byrne, in the making of the piece Mishnock, sought out that they questioned the horse part of that sculpture and found it in England and made a mould. So this is a mould of a piece of work that the horse is the mould from a John Henry Foley sculpture, and that was destroyed in the 1950s, and on it he placed a young girl from Ballymun sitting very casually astride a very formal kind of equestrian sculpture. It was originally intended to be in the centre of Ballymun itself, but actually it's in the grounds of a school, and again Lewis Lyons dictated that it shouldn't be where they thought it was going to be. I should mention there also that it wasn't all just sculpture in the Breaking Ground work. The Hotel Ballymun by Seamus Nolan is a really well respected intervention that he made in placing a hotel suite into the 15th floor of one of the building's towers in Ballymun. Okay, good. Then as we move into the 2000s, We have some really interesting then approaches to public art. And this is Subaquatic Dublin by Paul Gregg in 2004. That's in Crumlin Children's Hospital. It featured on the cover of the Public Art Guidelines, which also came out in this decade in 2004 and seen as a kind of one of the most notable pieces. That particular piece had, he created I suppose a model of Dublin in the tank, and then had about 100 odd fish swimming around it, so it looked like Dublin was submerged. But importantly, for children who were in isolation within the hospital, they had monitors and they could see the fish swim around the tank from their bedrooms. On a slightly personal note, I'm a frequent attender of Crumlin Children's Hospital, and 2 years ago I noticed it was gone, and we don't know what happened to it. So that is really unfortunate that it doesn't exist anymore. So, carry on. So over the past 20 years, and I'm going to skip through loads of things now, public art has been expanded to all art forms and arts practices, and books have been commissioned, forecourts have been transformed, theatre, music, film, community participation, and even exploring places and transforming spaces. So public art is taking on a huge range of ways of engaging with place and engaging with people. The Arts Council manages the website publicart.ie, and many projects commissioned over the lifespan of the Centre for Arts Scheme, and many of these projects you can see on that website in much more detail if you want to take a browse through that. The most up-to-date development in public art in Ireland, and I mentioned the development of the Centre for Arts Scheme back in 1997, that was expanded to all government departments. At that time, the budget for commissioning public artwork through the scheme was capped at 64,000. In January this year, January the 1st, 2020, those bounds were expanded and came into play. So we now have actually 1%, and it's not capped. But there's a section piece in there within each government department as to where within the bands that can fit. But for the first time, we have a much more expanded range of budgets that can be applied for Centre for Arts Scheme projects, which is really welcome. And with the year that's in it, that the work progress and the Arts Council will have a more advanced role and a more enhanced role in relation to the Centre for Arts Scheme going forward. With the year that's in it, some of that work has been paused, but it is being developed again. So by towards the end of this year, a new interagency committee will be set up across all government departments and other agencies, including local authorities, where we'll be looking at the scheme and how to maximise that funding for the benefit of artists and for the benefit of people. And it's been 16 years since there was an interagency committee on the Centre for Arts Scheme, so this piece of work is long overdue. So that's it, I think. You can follow publicart.ie and also on social media channels there where we keep up to date with commissions and outcomes from Centre for Arts Scheme projects. You can contact us through the website or my email is there as well. I don't know, there was actually I'm not going to show there just in case I've run out of time. There's a video link there, but I know you're going to show the folk radio video earlier on the publicart.ie website and on the YouTube channel attached to it. There are a number of films that we commissioned last year. Thankfully, we commissioned last year because we didn't show them this year. So you'll see folk radio later, but that's one of 6 videos which really show how creative and how ambitious people have been with the Centre for Arts Scheme in recent years. So that's it. Thank you very much. That was a very short history.
Well done unpacking over 100 years of public art in a short presentation. Great whistle-stop tour. There will be an opportunity now to ask some questions. We don't have too much time because we have a packed schedule today, but there are 2 microphones here to the front of the stage, so if anybody has a question to ask, we will ask you to come up to the front of the auditorium to ask a question. One thing that struck me, and I don't know whether, I suppose, Siobhan or Sally might be the people to answer this, but obviously there's a lot of talk about community with this project, and your definition of community has changed somewhat. But how big a challenge was it to get the communities to engage with the artists and to engage with the project overall?
I suppose as the day goes on and we're listening to some of the contributions from the artists, they'll be able to, be able to answer that more in depth. But in general, what we have found is that when the artists were making their original submissions to us, they had already identified communities that they wished to work with. So be it geographical or communities of interest. In most instances, we would have, as part of the second stage, we would have enabled the artists either by making links directly with the people we knew on the ground, or there would have been contacts that they had themselves, that they would have been able to go in and, I suppose, research and develop and find oftentimes key people in the community. Some were very obvious. As probably in the case of folk radio, for example, in that there was a building and there was a group around it, and it was, a very obvious one. But as in perhaps Sean's project, where he was looking at ring forts, a lot of that was going out and meeting with individual people and individual landowners or farmers. So I suppose it very much depended on the project, but in general, it goes back to the talents and the skills that the artists have as well in embracing those communities and bringing them with them on this journey. For most people or communities, they haven't had this direct involvement in public art. So it is a step into the unknown for them, and there's a huge amount of trust involved, but because we had remarkable artists working, they were able to bring those people along with them on a journey, and which obviously influenced and informed, but I think enlightened people as well as to the role of artists and their role in society as well.
Because I suppose, Sally, there was a big ask of the artists, because rather than just commissioning somebody to make a piece of art, it was about engaging with the community and bringing people along with you. And there's a bit of marketing, there's a bit of selling, there's a bit of politics, cajoling. So did that in some way dictate the artists who were commissioned and who were selected to take part in this project?
No, I don't think so. I think the brief was open enough to for us to be able to see through the proposals how they intended to work or hoped to work with the community. We were never at that stage saying, we want this, this and this and this, we want you to be working with these people. But we were saying to them, look, what are your ideas? How would you envisage working with people? And the idea of something that's organic is you might put in a proposal to work with a particular group, but along the journey you may meet very different people and it may change. So the idea, the principle and the concept behind it was really important, and knowing that those artists were able to deliver, I suppose.
Have we any questions from the floor? There's one thing that struck me, actually, you were talking about the Great Wall of Kinsale and how, I suppose, public consultation plays a big role in public art and commissioning public art, creating public art. But as the style of art changes and it becomes less monumental and less imposing on a community and on a place, does public consultation become less important, or is it still there?
Well, it's absolutely still there. As Sally and John will testify as part of this programme, and it's less about consultation and informing people. It's more about starting with people and what matters to them and what public art can do to reflect something meaningful to a community, that they will feel ownership over, proud of. Whatever it might be, wherever the outcome might be. And often, sometimes the outcome is not dictated. It starts with what the community, what matters to them most.
But are expectations of public art in some sense do they still expect to see, I suppose, a solid piece? You know what I mean? Something they can touch and feel and see?
It's because we have so many, over 200 years and longer around the country, that's what people see, that's what they identify as public art, and they expect to see something monumental there. As well, but there is less and less, and there's a concern as well with artists that the carbon footprint of creating something monumental is not great. So a lot of artists who have been working in hard sculptural material are no longer working that way, or we're open to working in a different way. So that's interesting. So that's another shift. You know, so I think we may probably see less physical works as time goes on, not monumental pieces. But you know, they're still there, and it's not just 2% harvesting. You know, I mentioned earlier that a lot of sculptures are still commissioned through memorial committees and family committees, and you know that's still happening. I recently got an email about funding a famine piece, you know, in May, I think it is actually. So you know, that's still happening, and that works happens, but you know, it's finding a balance between all of those.
Okay, well, we'll keep moving on. I'd like to thank our panel. Thank you very much for your presentation. So there is a question.
No, just a short question was just for yourself, Sinead. I suppose with the capping lift, you know, that's really great, but one thing that I hadn't heard kind of, I suppose, raised was the idea of a 1% on private development. For art, like I know there's examples of it internationally, and considering the amount of private development that goes on in Ireland, that could be huge. And I know even internationally, if developers don't want to commission the work themselves, they can give it to a fund, but before they get permission, the money has to be handed over, which in Ireland would be fantastic. But I've rarely heard it being raised.
But it's discretionary, really, by local authority to local authority, whether there is a kind of a part of a development levy includes funding towards an art piece. Some local authorities, particularly the very urban ones, Dublin City Council do have it, and some others do have it as well. But it does exist, but it's probably a quieter way of that happening, and sometimes it doesn't necessarily go into an actual art piece, but it might be to something within a public realm space in that development that is conducive to you know, events happening in that space, or maybe it's towards artists. Like for instance in Dublin City at the minute, one of their development levy pieces for development around the Docklands is to include more artist studios. So it's going into those kind of processes. So it does exist, but it's discretionary from local authority to local authority.
Okay. Well, thank you very much to our panel for the presentation. We're going to pause for our panel, please.